With the Cloud Bureau, and today we have a video on making a very simple Lightning web component to display Salesforce Lightning Design System formatted banners on app pages, home pages, and record pages within the Lightning App Builder. Now, if you've ever worked in the Lightning App Builder, you know that there is a rich text element, and on my screen right here, you see this at the very top. So we can add a rich text element to a home page, an app page, or a record page, but our options are fairly limited. We can sort of determine, whether we want bulleting and other kinds of things, but we can't really change the background, and there's no guarantee of consistency of styling if we use rich text elements in multiple locations. When I work with clients, one of the things I often install is a simple Lightning web component to be able to use Salesforce Lightning Design System, or SLDS, formatted text elements to these kinds of pages. We're going to build this today. And the focus of the video is really going to be on configuring a Lightning web component for use in Lightning App Builder targets, specifically the three that we have mentioned: record, home, and app pages. And we'll talk about how to have input properties so that admins and other folks in your organization who manage these in your org can use them across these kinds of pages in your implementation of Salesforce. So with that, we are going to get started. I'm going to hop into Visual Studio Code. And here I have just a basic empty project. And you'll see over here that there's nothing really in this, and my manifest is empty. Now, we're not going to use any kind of Apex or anything like that today. We're going to stay within Lightning Web Components just generally, because we're only doing something very, very basic. Now, I'm connected to the org that we just looked at. You can see this down here. And the first thing I'm going to do is just right-click on my LWC folder, and I'm going to create a new Lightning web component. I'm going to call this formatted text element. And we'll save it to the default directory, which is the LWC folder. Now, by default, we get the test for just testing. We also get an HTML file, a JavaScript file, and then a JavaScript metadata or XML file for the metadata around this Lightning web component. And we're going to spend a lot of time in this file. Now, when you create a Lightning web component using Visual Studio Code, we get the XML file, and really only two sort of nodes are specified here other than the sort of composing modes for the XML type and then the Lightning component bundle definition itself. We have the API version, and currently we're on API version 64. And then we have this is exposed, and the default is false. Now, if you're using Lightning Web Components and you're composing components within other components, and you never want them to show up in places like the Lightning App Builder or flow screens or things of that nature, then the is exposed is going to remain false. But we're going to use this in Lightning App Builder, so we're going to change this to true. I'm also going to add just a range of things that we can add for the metadata file itself. We're going to add what's called the master label. And this is what's going to show up in the Lightning App Builder when we go to add this to a record, app, or home page. And I'm just going to call this formatted text element with spaces. I'm also going to add a description. And here in the description, we'll say it's a configurable text element that uses Salesforce. I can't type today. Lightning Design System styling. Okay, so that's going to show up in my Lightning App Builder when I go to sort of choose this component as something I want to put on my page. We'll see the master label of formatted text element, and we'll see a description if we want to. The next thing I have to tell the metadata file is where I want this to show up. So what kinds of targets I want this in. So I'm going to add another XML node for targets. And then we're going to add a range of individual target items. We're going to say Lightning record page, because we want it to show up for record pages. We'll add one for Lightning app pages. And we'll also add one for home pages. Now, there are a broad range of other targets where we can use Lightning Web Components. These include things like flow screens and also in Experience Builder sites. The configuration for those is often very different than it is for record app and home pages, so things that are in the internal Salesforce application mainly. And so I'm not going to worry about those in this, but there's plenty of information about that in the documentation. After I've added my targets, I'm also going to add what are called target configs, so configurations for my targets. And I'll add a target config node. And for the config node, I have to say which of the targets this config node applies to, and we're going to say all of them. So I'm going to say Lightning record page, Lightning app page, and Lightning homepage. And I could copy and paste that if I wanted to, and that tells me for this config, which of my specified targets does it apply to. Now, I want an administrator or developer or someone who's using this Lightning Web Component in the Lightning App Builder to be able to specify information to change the styling of the SLDS text element that we're adding. And the way I'm going to do this is by adding properties that that person can use to configure this. Now, the naming conventions and the sort of attribution of these is pretty intricate or can be pretty complicated, so I'm going to try to walk through this as slowly as I can. But basically, we want to define a property. We need to give it a name, and in this case, the name that I give it has to correspond to the property in the JavaScript file to which it corresponds. So I'm going to call this display text. And this is going to be the property where the admin or developer can put in the text that they actually want to display. I need to give it a type, and this can be of various kinds. We're going to deal with strings and booleans today. This one is a string. I can give this property a description, and we'll just say the text you want to display. And then I need to say, I can say whether it's required, and I do want them to have to put in display text, so we'll say required equals true. And then we close our property. Now, because we're going to leverage the Salesforce Lightning Design System, we're going to leverage some sort of some basic class attributes that get specified when you're creating a box in a Lightning Web Component. And so we'll go through that process now. I'm going to add another property. We're going to call this one text alignment. It is also a type string. But in this case, and this is something that's pretty specific to the targets that we've defined, record pages, app pages, and home pages, this won't, for example, work in a flow screen. We can sort of turn this string property into a pick list by specifying what's called a data source. So I'm going to say data source is equal to, and then I'm going to give it a comma separated list of values. So we'll say left, right, and center. For description, we'll say the desired text alignment. And then in this case, instead of requiring it, I'm going to give it a default value. And we'll say the default is center. Okay, for our next property, we're going to talk about size. I'm just going to call this one size. It's also going to be of a type string. And because I want to constrain the choices that are possible here, we're going to define a data source. And I'm going to say in this case, it can be regular, small, extra small, or extra, extra small. The description, size can mean a lot of different things. We could think it refers to text size, so we're going to be pretty specific here and say the size of the box in terms of text padding. In other words, how much sort of padding space is there around the display text that we have provided in the little text element box? And I've forgotten labels on all of these. We're going to go back and add those, but for this one, we'll say label is box size. And we're also going to give this one a default, which is regular. And I'll close that, and I'm going to go back and add labels up here. For this one, we'll just say text alignment. And for the first one, we'll say display text. Okay. So that's 3 of our properties. We have the actual text we want to display, whether we want it left, right, or center aligned, and then the size of the box, so how much padding we want around the specific piece of text that we're trying to display. For the next one, we are going to do the theme. And in this, we're using sort of the theme class attributes from SLDS1. So Salesforce is in the process of switching from the first iteration of the Salesforce Lightning Design System to the second one. There's a lot of movement there. The specific sort of class attributes are not something that's emerged yet in SLDS2 as of this recording. So we're going to use the SLDS1. My assumption is that at some point these will correspond to the new color theming that is coming up with SLDS2. We're going to call this one theme. For the type, we're going to say string. And again, we're going to constrain the choices to use the theme values that are available in SLDS1. And I've actually typed these out to the side, so I'm going to just copy this so I don't have to retype all of these. And you'll see here that I'm using kind of a convention. So the color name or sort of the theme name, and then what color that corresponds to. So we have default, which is white or blank, shade, which is light gray, inverse, which is dark blue, alt inverse, which is kind of a midnight blue, success, which is green, info, which is gray blue, warning, which is yellow, error red, offline black. For this one, we'll give it a description. We're going to say the background color. Theme. For the label, we'll just say theme. And we're going to give this a default, and we will say that the default is just the default white. And I'll close that property. Okay, one more property. And this one is called alert texture. And in this case, the type is going to be Boolean, so it'll show up as a checkbox. And we'll say for the description, if checked, adds a striped background to the theme color. Now, sometimes when you use the alert texture and you use like offline, which is kind of a black color, it's impossible to see the alert texture. So we will say that it is variably effective based on the theme, just because your mileage might vary. For the label, we will call this alert texture. And we will give it a default value of false. Now this is a Boolean value, but I'm still putting false in quotation marks just for the syntax that we need. Okay, and that's what we're going to do here in this sort of XML file, the metadata file for this Lightning Web component. Just to cover what we have been through, we left the API version as was, so 64. We changed is exposed from false to true so that it shows up in the Lightning App Builder like we want. We've given it a label and a description that's friendly for folks who are using the Lightning App Builder. We've said the kinds of pages in Lightning App Builder that it can show up for. And then for each of those, we've specified a range of properties. So in our target config, we've said all 3 of those can be part of this. And I missed an in here, and this is Just gonna do a little bit of grooming. And then for each of these properties, we've said, what can the person who's in the Lightning App Builder actually specify? And we've said they can specify the display text, whether the text is aligned left, right, or center, the size of the padding around the text for the box, the themes, the background color, and then whether there is alert texture for this. Okay, that gets us with our metadata file. The next thing we're going to head over and do is just our HTML file. And this one's going to be pretty basic. I don't want to make this overly complicated. We're just going to say div class is equal to, and we're going to use class binding, which is a relatively new thing in Lightning Web Components. It came out a couple of releases ago as of this recording. We can actually set the class equal to an array of class attributes in our JavaScript file. So I'm going to do that. So class array is what we will say this is. I'll close my div, and then we're going to have this be bolded. And then for our text that we're actually going to display, we'll call this display text. Now you'll notice that this variable here, this display text, corresponds exactly to this here, and that is important. Okay, that's all we need for our HTML file. We'll head to our JavaScript file. Out of the as soon as it comes off the line, we have sort of the import, the standard import of the Lightning element from LWC, and then we have our export, so modern JavaScript module. I'm going to open this out. I'm going to add an import to our basic import of the API module, which we need to get our attributes, and we will add some of those here. And again, my names for these are going to correspond precisely to the names as they appear in this XML file. So we'll say display text, and we will say text alignment. We will say theme, size, and alert texture. So we've covered our bases in terms of the properties that we're allowing administrators and developers using the Lightning App Builder to put in for this. Now, to take care of my bound class attribute, I'm also going to create a variable here that's not API decorated. It's not something that gets passed in. It's just something that we're going to manipulate as this goes. So I'm going to call this class array to create the binding. It's going to be equal to a JavaScript array, and I'm going to add one element to it, which is SLDS box, because all of these are going to appear in a box. I also need sort of a lifecycle hook. So I'm going to tell the component to do something when the component sort of is inserted into the DOM. So that's our connected callback. This is a pretty common lifecycle hook function to use for Lightning Web Components. And I'm going to just keep this pretty basic, and all I'm going to have it do is call another method, which is set class attributes. And neither of these are taking an argument. Connected callback's never going to take an argument. Set class attributes, I don't need it to take an argument because all of the information I need is passed in via API. In my connected callback, all I'm going to do is call this set class attributes. And if you're relatively new to Lightning Web Components, one thing that takes a little bit of getting used to is this keyword this. This refers to sort of the context in which the code is running. And so this, in this case, refers to the module that we're in now. If you're importing other classes, you sometimes have to do some interesting kinds of instantiation to make this work. But anytime you're referring to something within a method that's outside of the method, whether that's another method or an attribute up here, you're always going to use this so that we know that this is the context to which we're referring. Okay, in our class attributes, we are going to do a little bit of manipulation. It's worth heading back over to our properties. So we know the display text is going to come in. That's already bound to our HTML text element. There's nothing to do there. For our text alignment, we have left, right, or center, and we have a default value of center. So there's always going to be a value. It's going to be center unless the person in the Lightning App Builder says left or right. So what we can do is head over here, and for size, we are going to say, for text alignment, we're going to say this class array. So we're saying this, which refers us to this context here in the class array. So we're getting this array that already has one element in it. We're going to push a new element. And I'm going to use template literals for this. And I'm going to say SLDS text align, which is kind of the base thing, an underscore. And then we have to tell it what it's going to do. And for within my template literal, I'll add an expression. And we'll say this text alignment to lowercase. Now, that takes some explaining. So we're basically getting this class array, so this variable up here that already is an array and it already has one class attribute in it. We're pushing or adding another attribute to this array. And we're using a template literal, which is basically a way to have kind of merge values within a text string. This first part is the design token for text alignment, SLDS-text-align underscore, and then some value here, which is either left, right, or center. And we're basically just saying, take the value that was passed in for text alignment, convert it to all lowercase, and concatenate it at the end of this underscore. And because in my property definition, we have left, right, and center, those are the precise values for those design tokens. And so we don't need to do anything other than coerce them to lowercase. Okay. The next one we're going to do is the theme. So we'll say this class array push. I'm going to do my template literals again. And in this case, we'll say SLDS theme underscore. So that's the start of the design token. And then we'll add a template literal expression. And we'll get this theme. So we're referring to this API passed in theme here. And we're going to split this by spaces, get the first item in the resulting array, and convert it to lowercase. Now, this relies on the formatting in my properties, so this is important to say. If you go look at themes, the commas separate some name of a theme with some description of what color that is. We don't actually care about the color in this case. This is something that's just for the person in the Lightning App Builder to see, so they have some guidance on what this theme name means. So what we're doing is taking this string, we're splitting it by the white space here in the middle, and then taking the first item in the resulting array, which is default, and then converting it to all lowercase. And I very intentionally given these sort of the specific names for the design tokens in SLDS1. So again, we're pushing SLDS theme underscore, we're taking the theme that's passed in, we're splitting by a space, we're taking the first value in the resulting array, and then we're converting that to lowercase. Okay. For our last two attributes, or the things that we want to sort of manage with respect to the box, it's going to take a little bit of control flow just because there are some cases in which we don't actually need to add a class attribute to make the thing work. So for example, if we look at the size, we see that the options that the admin or developer has are regular, small, and extra small. Regular is the default, so we don't actually need to specify a class attribute if we just want regular. We only need a class attribute if small, or extra small is chosen. So I'll say if this size is not equal to regular, and again, JavaScript is case sensitive, so my R is capitalized here, then we're going to add another element to my class array. We're going to push, I'll do my template literals, and we're going to say SLDS box underscore, and then we'll add an expression value. Say this size to lowercase. And that will result in SLDS box small or SLDS box extra small or extra small by converting that to lowercase. All right, for our last one is a Boolean, so it's the alert texture, and the default is no alert texture. So we only need to add a class attribute if the the person in the Lightning App Builder has said, yes, I want to add alert texture to my text theme. So we'll say if this alert texture, and that's all I need to say for that, because JavaScript is going to, it is a Boolean, but JavaScript would coerce it to true or false anyway. The default value is false, so this is going to come through as false unless someone has checked the box, in which case it will come through as true. So if they've checked that box as true and it's passed into API as true, then this is going to evaluate as true. So we'll say this class array push, and then I don't need template literals here, but we'll continue that use. We'll say alert texture. Okay, that's all we need for our JavaScript file. And just again, to cover what's happening here, when this component gets inserted to the DOM, or into the sort of your web application, into the browser, when it shows up, the API values are going to get passed in based on what the developer or admin has specified in the Lightning App Builder. This lifecycle hook for connected callback is going to fire, and it's going to call the method set class attributes. The class attributes is going to add elements to this class array based on the values passed in for text alignment, theme, size, and alert texture. All right, let's deploy this to our org and take a look at the result. Yep. I've messed up something in my... I missed my ends pretty universally. There we go. Try that again. And that has deployed. Let's hop back over to Salesforce. And I want to show this just what this looks like in the various targets where we have said it is available. So I'm going to refresh this page. And then we will go edit. I'm going to get rid of this text card that we use just to talk about the rich text element. And I'm going to scroll down, and you'll note that when you open Lightning App Builder, you have the standard components here and then custom components here. And you can see that formatted text element, which is the name that I put in the XML file, the master label, is how this is going to show up. So I'm going to move this to the top. And it's telling me it's invalid, and that's because it's requiring this value for text. But you'll see there that once I've put in some text, it shows up with our defaults. So our text alignment is center, our box size is regular, our theme is default white, and there is no alert texture. But I can manipulate these. I like a box size of extra small just to get it down right to where the text is. I often use the warning theme, so it shows up bright and yellow for folks if I'm calling attention to something specifically. And then I will often add an alert texture to that. And you might be able to see kind of the diagonal coloration that's added to this. I'm going to save this. We'll go back and take a look at the result. And you'll see that it's shown up here. I'm going to hop over to this. This is a Lightning app page for another sort of Lightning Web Components situation that I'm working on. We'll show you what it looks like to do it in an app page. We'll edit this page. Again, I'll come down to my formatted text element. We'll just say app page example. I could change the text alignment to left. I could change the box size to small. I could change the theme to, let's say, success in this case, and it's going to show me that nice success screen. Save that. And then let's look at what it looks like on a record page. I'm going to hop in just to a person account. We'll go to edit this page. And we'll come down here, grab our formatted text element. I'm going to put it here just to show you that it can go and it's going to sort of change shape based on where we put it in the Lightning App Builder. So because this is a 2/3, 1/3 layout, we're moving it over here into this 1/3 section. It's going to be much smaller. And we'll call this record page example. We'll leave center alignment. The box size will do extra small in this case. The theme will do offline. That's going to give us a black color with a white text. And you can see here that if I do alert texture, nothing really happens. So I don't need that here. Alert texture shows up depending, usually when it's a lighter color. So if I were going to do shade, for example, and then alert texture, you would see that texture show up. We'll save that and activate it. Make that the org default. Let's save it one more time and take a look at our result. What's great about this component is that you get that consistent styling across the various places where you're using text, and you can also change the background color and give the alert texture. So it pops out a little bit more for the user and doesn't get lost in the page. And we're using those Salesforce Lightning Design System tokens so that we have a really consistent look and feel with the rest of the application. I hope this is useful, especially in terms of talking about the targets and how to configure the XML file in a Lightning Web Component for use in the Lightning App Builder. And we will have a link to download this or to fork the code for this in our GitHub repository if you want to do that and just take a look at the code, or if you want to try to code along and understand what's happening. Thanks so much for your time, and we will talk to you soon.